Leadership has become more complex than ever. Not only technologies, but also markets are changing very rapidly. There are different needs of different generations, and also the pandemic has left us with hybrid and virtual workplaces. And despite the increasing complexity of leadership and also more young people being leaders, there's very little pragmatic training on how to become an effective leader. That's why in this video, I'm going to show you a very simple way to become a more effective leader based on a simple personality test, which is called the 16 personalities. And I'm Krista. I'm a life and business coach from Switzerland. And I realized that with many of the people I work with, it's always the same models that create the most transformational moments. And I decided to share these transformational elements in these videos. And these videos I call hacks, life and career hacks. And with these hacks, you have access to coaching whenever you need and wherever you want. So what can you expect from this video? You basically get three things out of it. One is more self-awareness. The second is more awareness on how you relate with others. And the third is you get more awareness about a team dynamic and how different people with different preferences work in a team. We're going to work with the 16 personalities test that you see here. The 16 personalities test is a great resource to drive team transformation and also to become a more effective leader. I want to mention here that I'm in no way associated with 16 personalities. It just has been a very useful resource to drive the teamwork that I've been doing. So this is a good moment to go on the website and take the test. The test is free. It takes you about 12 minutes to do it. And you then want to invest some time to carefully read through the results. Come back to this video with your 5-letter combination, and then we're going to debrief together what these letters mean. So first of all, it's important to understand what does this test measure. Do you know? I invite you for a little experiment here. And what I ask you to do is basically please cross your arms. And then you cross your arms the other way round, which is a bit clumsy. I can do it too, but it feels a bit weird. And it's actually the same as if you would write with your non-preferred hand, because then you can still write with the other hand, but it requires much more energy. And that's exactly what the test is measuring. The test is measuring a preference. And a preference doesn't mean you cannot do the other way around, but it just requires more energy. So now that you know what the test measures, let's see what the different letters signify. Let me give you an overview first. So the first dimension is extroversion versus introversion. And it's not the classical social extroversion or introversion, it's more where you get your energy from. So do you get your energy more from being with other people, or maybe more from concentration and being in a quieter context? We're going into more depth after. The second dimension is which information do you prefer? Do you like the detailed, the pragmatic information, or do you like and prefer the big picture? And then the third dimension is how do you take decisions? Do you do it more logically, thinking, or more intuitively, feeling? And then the fourth dimension is how do you approach life in general? Are you more on the planning side, or do you prefer to just improvise? And then the last dimension is how confident are you in your abilities and with taking decisions? So that's basically assertive and turbulent. In this video, we're going to focus on the first 4 letters because they have the most impact on team transformation. Let's start with the first letter, introversion versus extroversion. So what does it mean exactly? So as you see here, the people who score on an E level or with an E preference, they like interaction. So they tend to act very quickly, they learn while they talk about something, and probably they are the people who are expressive. Mostly when they need energy, they probably go out on a party. On the contrary, the people who score with an I preference, they get energy from concentration. They reflect usually before they say something, and they might be more aloof, but it doesn't have to be. It's just when you need energy, you probably go into a quieter setting. Let me give you an example from the business context. The people with an E preference, they usually process while they talk something through. While the people on the I side, they usually get more energy from concentration and from reflecting. And it's interesting how it plays out in meetings, because in meetings, often these people talk a lot because they're processing, while people with an I preference, they think, why are they talking all the time? Because they only talk when they have reflected. And usually what I do to make this dimension with the I and the E a bit more tangible, I make a little exercise with the people. What I'm asking them is that they should draw, and not describe in words, but draw in a picture their ideal workplace, the workplace they can be most productive in. And that's very interesting what comes out of that. So let me show you a couple of examples. You see, this drawing is made by people with an E preference. So that drawing is typically reflecting a lot of social dynamic. You know, they have lots of different areas where they can relate to each other. I think this was a pool table, and there's some areas where they can sit and talk, and there's lots of different areas where they can socialize. And interestingly enough, this is a picture done by an I group. And the I group has mainly focused on one single workplace, and to have that very quiet. And this is just an example, but it's, I've done this a lot of time with different teams, and the pictures are always very similar. So this is a very good exercise to make people aware of their E or I preference. Now that you know more about the first preference, the E and the I, let's move to the second preference, which is how do you process information and which information you prefer. So it's the S versus the N letter. And let's do a quick experiment to make this a bit more tangible. So let's see what these two letters mean. So you see here, the S people, the observant people, they prefer more the detail or pragmatic instruction, step-by-step instructions, or a lot of data. While the people with an N preference, they love to see the big picture. So when you start a meeting, for example, you need to give them the overarching goal. And usually people with an N preference, they don't like too much detail or too much pragmatic instruction. They like the liberty to do something as they want to do it. And that's a huge difference between the two. And let us make a little example. Can I get you please to look at this picture for a few seconds and tell me what you see? So I put it away. So usually I ask the people now what they saw. And what comes out of this discussion is some people saw like an auction, like a bunch of people discussing something, like more let's say the pattern of the picture. While other people, they see lots of details. They see 3 cats and X many pictures and a detail underneath the table. And I'll let you look at this again. And this is basically how people looking at the same picture process very different information. Some people see the overarching picture, and then some people, they see the detail. To make this a bit more tangible, let me give you some examples of our daily lives. An example that I love is if I had to pull together an IKEA furniture, I would just know this is going to be a chair, and then I do something, trial and error. While people with an observant preference, they probably would follow the instruction step by step. And then one more example from sports. People with an N picture, they will probably just visualize the success they want to achieve, while other people would go with a very precise training plan. And obviously, it's not always just one or the other. Probably most of the people do both sides. But just what I want to say here, usually we have a natural tendency or natural preference to do the one or the other. So now that you know the first two preferences, let's move to the third preference group. The third is all about how you take decisions, more on a thinking, logical side, or more on a value-driven or even feeling side. So let's see what that signifies. People who have a T preference, they love to decide logically. They love to think something well through and, to process data and create maybe pro and contra lists. While people on the feeling side, they decide more intuitively. It's important for them that something feels right, and they have to check their feelings that they can make a decision. Here also, some people on the feeling side, they would just say, hey, this feels right, I'm gonna do this project. While people on the T side, they will probably collect data first or do some research. And it's actually the same here. People on the T side, they would do decision trees to make sure that their decision is very well thought through. While people on the F side, they basically just want it to feel right, and then they embark on the journey. Good, now that you know the first 3 preference dimensions, let's move to the 4th one. How do you approach life in general? Are you more on the planning side or more on the spontaneous side? Let's see what the letters mean. So the J, the judging part, is you love the planning. You create a plan to execute an idea, and that gives you structure and overview and maybe also security. And then the people with a P preference, they improvise. They execute something step by step, and they probably like to be spontaneously. Let me give you a few examples on this one as well. So one good example is traveling. There are some people, they just make a very detailed travel plan, while others, they probably just book the first flight and then they take it from there. I think that's a very telling example. And another example is some people, they make a very detailed planning, step-by-step planning to execute a project, while other people, they just build a prototype and start the testing and take it from there. So now that we have described the first 4 preference dimensions, let's see how these preferences impact your daily lives. So first of all, based whether you have an I or an E preference, manage your calendars more proactively. People who have an E preference, they probably can do many meetings a day, while people with an I preference, they should block some time out to do stuff that requires concentration, or stuff where they can pull back from the social context. And that's actually your responsibility to manage your calendar accordingly and give pushback on certain meetings that you probably don't need to attend to. On the second dimension of the preferences, it's very important to be aware what kind of information you need. Do you need more the big picture or more the detail? And get that information. I have a business partner who is very much on the S side, so he gives me a lot of detail while not giving me the overarching goal. So I often ask him, okay, wait, where do we go? So I get the information that I need to be orientated. And then on the last 2 preference dimensions, it's all about complement your preferences. If you're more on the, on the prospecting side, on the more spontaneous side, but you need to plan, get someone who is good in planning and just complement your skills. And it's actually the same also for the other letters. Get someone who complements you. Now you should know what all the preference dimensions mean. And I hope from the first section of this video, you raise some self-awareness on how you tick and how you process information, how you take decisions, and so on. So in the second part of this video, it's all about how you relate to other people, let's say in a one-to-one situation. Typically, what I invite the people to do is draw 2 axes. One axis is about the E and the I dimension, and then one axis is about the N and the S dimension. So this is the communication part, this is more like the extroversion and the introversion part. And when you drew the 2 axes, this basically leaves you with 4 different quadrants, with only the first 2 preference dimensions. So let's start with the ESs. The ESs are very practical people who are also outgoing. So that are typical salespeople, for example. They know a lot of detail about what they do, but they're also very extroverted. And then the second quadrant, we typically refer to them as ambassadors. They know the big picture, and they can also mobilize people to believe in a certain idea. So that's why we call them ambassadors. Obviously, you can also work with different terminologies. And then more on the I preference, we have the people who love to reflect and they innovate things because they're into the big picture, into visionary topics, and they're more on the reflective side. So those people are typical innovators. And then we have the ISs. They're very reflective and they're also more on the realistic side here because they're on the pragmatic, detailed and data side. So usually, and why we call them challengers, those people like the status quo, but not in a negative way. They just protect what is good and they don't want to change anything for the sake of change. Good, now that you know what the 4 quadrants mean, it's also time to take your first 2 preference dimensions and put yourself into this matrix here. And what I suggest you do, take the first 2 letters and also look for the percentages that you scored in, because this is the 50% cutoff. If you have a 55 preference on E, for example, and then a 90% preference on the N, you probably land here somewhere. If someone has, a preference then more on the IS side, it's probably very interesting to see how you relate to this person. Because typically what we see in practice is that people with similar preferences, it's easier for them to relate because either they talk a lot or they go more in concentration, or they like the big picture, they like the detail. So it's easier to relate with the people who have the same preferences. That would also imply that here across the diagonals, it's maybe a bit more, it requires more energy or more, let's say, more mindfulness to relate with these people. So I have very productive relationships with people who are on the diagonal, but it requires more, let's say, more mindfulness to relate with them. So how does that impact our daily lives? Again, there are some implications. For the E's and the I's, when you relate with each other, create space for the E's to talk and the I's to think. And I think that's a very important implication, because usually the E's fill all the acoustic emptiness, while if they would get or make some pauses, the I's could probably say something as well. Then in terms of the information, give other people the information they need, because usually what we do, we communicate the way that is closest to our preference. So if I have an N preference, I also communicate the big picture, while it's better that I guess the preference of the other people and then I give them the information they need and not the information I need. So with the last group of preferences, the only thing I want to say here, that it's important to understand that there are different ways of doing something and we have different preferences and all the preferences are valid. So in the first part of the video, we explained the different preferences, and I hope you raised your self-awareness about why you do certain things you do. In the second part of the video, I hope you raised more of, or you got some more awareness about how you liaise with other people. And now the third part is all about a team situation. So how do we interact with each other if we have a big group of different preferences? What you could do here with your team is actually, do the same as we've done in the second module of this video. You basically also have the 4 quadrants, and then you make all your team members put a mark on where they stand in these quadrants. And what you see will be a big reflection of different points. And there's very interesting examples that I can share here, because one day we worked with a very scientific organization. The people were all very much on the IS quadrant here, but they also needed to organizationally to develop in a more sales-oriented organization because they weren't getting so much funds anymore. And it was really interesting to see that they had lots of people here, but almost no one who was able to do the whole sales work. And this is just one example of many. What you do when you put the different points here is that sometimes we have a strength. So in this example, it was that they're very scientific, very good researchers, and very reflected. But what is our blind spot? And the blind spot of them obviously was that they weren't so extroverted and they couldn't relate so much to different stakeholders. And this is also what I suggest you doing as well. Once you have a pattern here, think of what are our strengths, what are our blind spots, and what does this, how does this impact us? Can we just complement ourselves in a blind spot? Do we need to recruit more people to make our team work? Because usually we say the more people we have in all different quadrants, the better the team is able to confront whatever challenge they like. So one more thing that is important to understand about the dynamic of your team. Do you know what stress does with our preferences? Usually stress enhances the preferences, it makes them more extreme. So people, for example, with an E preference, they talk you to death. They talk so much when they're stressed, while people with an I preference, they become even more quiet. And sometimes that's important to understand about your team dynamic, because during very challenging situations or a lot of change or a lot of pressure, the preferences become more accentuated. And I think it helps to sometimes understand that to relate better to other people. So now we're actually at the end of this video, and I hope the first section helped you to understand what the preference dimensions of the 16 personalities mean and how they impact you and why you work like you work or you act like you act. And then in the second part of the session, I hope you got some more awareness on how you can be a more effective leader when it comes to other people, be it in the one-to-one or even in a whole team situation. And with the last metrics we made, you have a tool, and a very powerful tool, to develop your team. So if you like this video, there's actually more content to be found on upskill.ch, as well as the templates that we used for this video today. I hope this video gave you an easy and pragmatic tool to develop yourself and your team. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.